Chapter 1. The telegram that changed everything. The great drawing room of Braracknel Manor glittered with the subdued luxury that only old money could command. Velvet drapes thick with the dust of generations, framed windows that looked out over endless green lawns where the last of the summer roses drooped in the humid night air. Inside, the chandeliers cast a soft golden glow over the assembly of guests, dukes, earls, and society matrons, mingling with artists, writers, and the occasional ambitious solicitor. At the center of it all, like a jewel in a carefully crafted diadem, stood Lady Eugenia Braracknel, a woman of iron will wrapped in velvet charm. Lady Braracknel was the undisputed ruler of this gilded world. No marriage, no investment, no scandal moved through the upper circles without her knowing glance and carefully measured approval. In her late 60s, her once remarkable beauty had given way to an even more formidable presence. Her sharp gray eyes missing nothing, her sharp tongue feared even by men twice her size. Tonight's gathering was one of her frequent little affairs, which in truth were carefully orchestrated events designed to tighten social alliances and punish those who dared cross her. The evening had begun pleasantly enough. Glasses of champagne tinkling against laughter, the distant strains of ATA, string quartet drifting from the music room, and whispered gossip exchanged behind fans and over the rims of crystal goblets. The storm, when it came, was no more than a soft rumble in the distance. At first, it was nearing 11 o'clock, when an unusual hush fell over the room. The guests, sensing the change, began gathering their wraps and murmuring polite farewells. A few, lingering in hope of a final word with Lady Braracknel, circled discreetly near her chair. At that moment, the double doors opened and the butler entered with his customary silent efficiency. Upon the polished silver tray he carried rested a single envelope. "A telegram for you, my lady," he announced, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable tension that seemed to vibrate against the heavy air. Lady Braracknel, seated in a high-backed chair with a perfect view of the proceedings, accepted the missive with a mild arch of her brow. Telegrams were not uncommon in her world. Sudden changes to estate holdings, scandalous tidings about some cousin or another, urgent requests for her advice or intervention. Yet, something about the butler's demeanor and the lateness of the hour made the guests glance at one another uneasily. Lady Braracknel broke the seal with an elegant flick of her gloved fingers. She read the message. Her lips tightened almost imperceptibly, and the color drained from her face. For one ghastly moment, it seemed she would faint. Her hand gripped the arm of the chair, with knuckles white against the dark mahogany. Sir Julian Ransom, always eager to be seen attending to a lady of influence, stepped forward at once. "My lady, is something amiss?" Lady Braracknel recovered herself, swiftly, but her voice lacked its usual commanding edge. No, merely tiresome family business," she said, forcing a thin smile that did not reach her eyes. Without another word, she rose abruptly. Her jewels caught the light, sending harsh glints across the room, and she left with swift, almost unseemly haste, the crumpled telegram still clutched tightly in her hand. The butler, taking his cue from his mistress, discreetly withdrew. Atmosphere soured thereafter. Whispers rose in the empty spaces left by Lady Bracknell's sudden departure. Some guests made plausible excuses and left quickly. Others remained behind, exchanging significant glances and sotto voce commentary. "She's had a shock, that much is clear," murmured Lady Witherscombe, a known connoisseur of other people's misfortunes. "Mark my words," said Major Hornby to his wife, as he helped her into her wrap. "There'll be a death announced before the week is out." By midnight, Braracknel Manor was silent, save for the ticking of the great clock in the hall and the occasional creak of the old house settling into the night. At 8 the next morning, the household was thrown into chaos. It was the maid Elsie, a girl no older than 17, who found Lady Bracknell. The girl's scream, sharp and shrill, roused the house from its uneasy slumber. Lady Bracknell was discovered in her private study, lying at an unnatural angle beside her writing desk. A blow to the temple, consistent with a fall against the sharp corner of the heavy oak furniture, had proved fatal. Her hand still reached out, as though towards something unseen. The doctor, summoned at once, concluded that it was a tragic accident. A misstep, perhaps, caused by the storm loosening the floorboards, or by an incautious rise from her chair. In a moment of upset, he was sympathetic but firm. But there was one detail that gnawed at the edges of certainty. The telegram. No trace of it remained. It had not been found among her personal effects, nor among the debris scattered by her fall. It had vanished as completely as if it had never existed. Moreover, Mrs. Daphne Armitage, Lady Bracknell's companion secretary, and perhaps only true confidant, swore under oath that Lady Bracknell had seemed terrified, not merely unsettled, by whatever news the telegram contained. It was as though, Mrs. Armitage said with trembling hands, she had seen the shadow of death itself written in those words. The local police, led by the earnest but unimaginative Inspector Wellham, declared the matter closed within 2 days. No signs of forced entry, no signs of struggle, no theft of valuables, an unfortunate accident. Case closed, but not for Mrs. Armitage. Stubborn and driven by loyalty, she sent a letter to the one man she believed could see beyond the obvious. And so it was that, 3 days later, a hired motorcar delivered a certain small, fastidious Belgian to the gravel drive of Braracknel Manor. Poirot stepped down carefully, brushing an invisible speck from the sleeve of his impeccable grey suit. Beside him stood Captain Hastings, his tweed-clad figure already surveying the old house with a faint frown. "A fine old place," Hastings muttered, "but a bit grim, don't you think, Poirot?" Poirot smoothed his moustache and surveyed the manor with shrewd, calculating eyes. "The grandeur, Hastings, it hides many things. One must look not at the surface, but at the soul of such a house." They were met at the door by Mrs. Armitage herself, a woman whose calm demeanor now seemed frayed and brittle. She clasped Poirot's hand tightly. "Thank you for coming, Monsieur Poirot. They think me mad, but I know something terrible has been done." Poirot inclined his head with great solemnity. "Rest assured, madam, Hercule Poirot is here. We shall find the truth, and we shall give Lady Bracknell the justice she deserves." He paused, his sharp gaze flickering across the hallway, noting the slightly misaligned umbrella stand, the faint scuff marks on the polished floor, the anxious glance Mrs. Armitage cast toward the closed doors of the study. "The house," he murmured, "it already speaks." And somewhere, buried under velvet carpets and whispered lies, he would find the answers. Chapter 2. A house, heavy with secrets. Poirot moved through the halls of Braracknel Manor with the air of a man cataloguing every detail, not merely the grand paintings and priceless heirlooms, but the way the carpets bunched slightly in corners, the faint scratches on the banisters, the discoloration near the hinges of a locked door. Nothing escaped his keen gaze. Mrs. Armitage hurried to keep pace with him, wringing her hands in a fashion both nervous and sincere. "We have been in chaos since her ladyship's passing," she admitted in a low voice. "The servants are frightened. Some of the guests have spread dreadful stories, that the house is cursed, that Lady Braracknel saw her death in that telegram." Poirot gave a small nod, as though to encourage her without interrupting the flow of her anxieties. "Tell me, madam," he said, pausing near a heavy oak cabinet. "This telegram. No one has found it." "No, Monsieur Poirot. I searched myself, and I asked the butler to turn out the study from top to bottom. It is nowhere." "And the butler? Rogers? A reliable man. He has been with the family for 20 years. Poirot gave a faint but said nothing further. He moved forward with dainty steps, as though careful not to disturb the dust of secrets that hung so palpably in the air. The study was just as Mrs. Armitage had described it. Heavy curtains drawn half against the light. A great mahogany desk dominating the room. Rows of ledgers and correspondence stacked neatly, but without enthusiasm. The scene of death itself showed few traces. No blood. Only a dark stain on the rug where Lady Braracknel had struck her head. A corner of the desk bore a slight nick, no doubt where she had collided. Poirot moved with care, scanning every inch. His fingers, immaculate even without gloves, brushed the surface of the desk, the edge of the bookshelf, the arms of the chair. He crouched by the fireplace, peering into the grate. A faint line, a disturbance in the ashes, caught his eye. "She burned something," he said softly. Mrs. Armitage hesitated. "We thought perhaps it was correspondence. She often destroyed sensitive letters." Poirot nodded slowly, as if half to himself. "Sensitive letters? Or a telegram?" Mrs. Armitage paled. "You believe—" "I believe, madame, that the absence of the telegram is a fact most significant, and that its destruction, if it occurred, was either by her own hand or someone else's." He straightened and turned to face her fully. "Tell me, who was present at the house the night of Lady Braracknel's death?" Mrs. Armitage inhaled sharply, gathering herself. There were several guests remaining after the soirée, staying overnight. Sir Julian Ransom, a family friend for many years. Mr. Gregory Standish, her solicitor. Lady Frances Mortimer, a distant cousin. Miss Ivy Denholm, her ward. And of course, Mr. Anthony Braracknel. Her nephew, Poirot recalled. Yes, he is her heir. Or was to be. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, always the money, eh, Hastings?" he murmured. I, standing nearby, nodded gravely. "It is rarely absent, Poirot," Mrs. Armitage continued. "There was also Dr. Felix Cummings, a guest from London. He had come originally at Lady Bracknell's invitation to consult about some minor health complaints. Poirot's eyebrows lifted slightly. Indeed, a medical man on hand. Mrs. Armitage fidgeted. She was concerned about her heart of late. Poirot considered this for a moment, his fingertips pressed together. A useful precaution, or a convenient one, depending on perspective. He paused, and the servants, Rogers, the butler, Elsie, the maid who found her, cook, and the 2 kitchen girls, but they were nowhere near the study that night. Poirot tapped his lips thoughtfully. Bien, we must speak with them all. But first, I should very much like to see Lady Bracknell's bedroom. The bedroom was a testament to Lady Bracknell's character. Precise, austere, and immaculately ordered. No frippery here. Dark woods, severe silks, and the faintest scent of lavender hung in the air. Poirot moved to the writing desk, inspecting its drawers. Here, too, he found evidence of a deliberate hand. Letters filed meticulously, financial accounts recorded in a neat, strong script, invitations stacked by date of event. He opened the final drawer and paused. Inside lay a thin sheaf of papers, bound with a crimson ribbon. Hastings peered over his shoulder. "What is it, Poirot?" Poirot lifted the papers delicately. "They are drafts, mon ami. Drafts of Lady Bracknell's last will and testament." Mrs. Armitage gasped audibly. But the final will was already signed. It is in the hands of Mr. Standish." Poirot's eyes gleamed. But drafts reveal intention, madam. And intention is often the motive behind a crime." He spread the pages across the desk. Carefully, he read through the drafts. It was as he suspected. Subtle changes between versions. In one, Anthony Bracknell received the bulk of the estate. In another, his portion was slashed significantly, favoring instead the establishment of a charitable foundation in Lady Bracknell's name. In yet another, Evie Denholm appeared poised to inherit a significant sum. Poirot's finger hovered over the dates. The last draft was altered a mere week before Lady Bracknell's death. He murmured, "Curious, is it not?" Mrs. Armitage was visibly distressed. "I had no idea. She spoke of changing her will, but I thought it only idle talk." Poirot gathered the pages together with delicate care. "No, madam. Lady Bracknell was not a woman who spoke idly." He turned. "And those who stood to lose by her final decisions may have had cause, grave cause, to fear what that telegram portended." The day waned as Poirot and Hastings continued their silent survey of the manor. By evening, the suspects had been gathered in the drawing-room. Sir Julian Ransom, with his ruddy cheeks and shifting gaze, Mr. Standish, the solicitor, composed but too quick to answer, Lady Frances Mortimer, brittle and waspish, Ivy Denholm, pale and wide-eyed, and Anthony Bracknell, lounging with an insolence that barely concealed his nerves. Poirot entered the room with the air of a man perfectly at ease, though his eyes missed nothing. "Messieurs et mesdames," he said, bowing slightly, "I thank you for your patience. It is my custom, you see, to observe before I question, to listen before I accuse." He smiled pleasantly. "And now, Hercule Poirot will begin his little inquiry." There was a stir among the assembled guests, a collective tightening of shoulders and throats. Outside, The rain began again. A soft, persistent tapping against the long windows, as though the night itself were listening. Chapter 3. Poirot questions the household. The atmosphere in the drawing room of Braracknel Manor could have been sliced with a knife. Poirot, his figure neat and composed against the grand fireplace, surveyed the assembly with an expression of mild curiosity. His eyes, however, those piercing, calculating eyes, flickered from face to face with the speed of a hawk tracking a field mouse. He allowed a beat of silence to pass, letting the pressure build before he spoke. "It is a matter delicate, mes amis," he said, hands folded neatly in front of him. "Lady Braracknel is dead. The police, they are satisfied. But Hercule Poirot," he tapped his temple lightly, "he is not satisfied." Anthony Braracknel gave a soft, derisive snort, and slouched further into his chair. Poirot's gaze sharpened fractionally. "And so," he continued smoothly, "I must trouble you all for a few small questions. Nothing formidable, I assure you. Merely the establishing of simple facts." He gestured to Hastings, who produced a leather-bound notebook and a pencil with military precision. "We begin," Poirot announced lightly, "with Sir Julian Ransom." Sir Julian, a florid-faced man whose waistcoat strained against the results of a fondness for port, shifted uncomfortably. "I should be happy to assist," he muttered, tugging at his collar. Poirot inclined his head graciously. "You were a guest at Lady Braracknel's party." "Indeed, long-standing family friend." "And after the telegram arrived?" Sir Julian hesitated. Well, I did not see the telegram myself. I only observed Lady Braracknel's distress. You offered assistance, a few polite inquiries. She dismissed them. Then you departed." "Yes, soon after. I had my man waiting with the car." Poirot's fingers tapped softly against his jacket sleeve. "You are quite certain you saw nothing else unusual? No visitors arriving? No messages passed in secret?" Sir Julian's forehead glistened. "No, nothing." Poirot nodded as though satisfied. But Hastings, noting the slight twitch at the corner of Sir Julian's mouth, scribbled something furiously into the notebook. Next came Gregory Standish, the solicitor. He rose, smooth as silk, and bowed slightly. "Mr. Standish," Poirot said, "it is said that you held Lady Braracknel's will in your keeping." "I did," Standish replied. His voice was measured, his demeanor one of careful professionalism. "And did you notice anything odd in her behavior in the days preceding her death?" Standish pursed his lips. Lady Braracknel had made some recent amendments to her will, as you have no doubt discovered. She was unsettled, but then legal matters often distress those unaccustomed to them. "Indeed," Poirot said mildly. "And the telegram, did you glimpse it?" "No." Standish's denial came swiftly. "I was outside conversing with Sir Julian when the butler delivered it." Poirot raised a brow. "So you rely upon second-hand knowledge?" Standish allowed a tight smile. "Is that not the burden of most solicitors, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot inclined his head again, making a small note of his own on a card he withdrew from his pocket. Standish sat down, composed but just slightly too still, like a man determined not to betray nerves. Lady Frances Mortimer was next, her thin frame stiff with indignation. "I fail to see the necessity of this circus," she declared as she perched on the edge of her brocade chair. Lady Bracknell's death was a tragic accident. Perhaps, madame, Poirot said with a courtesy that held a faint edge. Nevertheless, I must trouble you. She sniffed. I saw nothing unusual. I spoke with Lady Bracknell earlier in the evening. She seemed in excellent spirits. If she received a disturbing telegram, it was news to me. Poirot's gaze lingered on her sharp-lined features. You were close with Lady Bracknell? We were cousins, she replied crisply. And yet, Poirot murmured, you did not notice her change of mood. Lady Frances colored slightly. I said I saw nothing. You may choose to believe me or not. Poirot smiled thinly. I am always most interested in what people do not say, madam. Then came Ivy Denholm. The young woman, barely 20, was pale and fragile-looking, with great dark eyes that flitted about the room like trapped birds. She twisted a handkerchief nervously as she answered Poirot's questions. I was in the music room after dinner, she said in a whisper. Practicing? Alone? No, Mr. Anthony came in for a while. We talked. Nothing serious. The party, mostly. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And Lady Bracknell? You did not see her again after the telegram? Ivy shook her head. No, I heard whispers that something had upset her, but I was told not to disturb her. And you obeyed. A pause. Of course, she said finally, though Poirot noticed the tremor in her voice. He allowed her to retreat to her seat, offering no more than a gentle nod. Finally, Anthony Bracknell. He sauntered forward, slouching insolently in the chair directly opposite Poirot. Fire away, he said lazily. I expect you think I'm the villain of the piece. Poirot steepled his fingers. I think nothing yet, monsieur. Tell me, where were you when Lady Bracknell received the telegram? Anthony shrugged. Upstairs, smoking, with Dr. Cummings. We had a brandy or two. Heard some sort of fuss downstairs, but thought nothing of it. And after? I went to the drawing room to collect Ivy. She was plunking away at the piano. Then I turned in. Poirot tilted his head. Simple, no. Anthony smiled. All teeth and no warmth. Simple's how I like it. Poirot studied him a moment longer, then rose. I thank you all for your patience. He straightened his cuffs with delicate precision. You may return to your activities. But I ask you, do not leave Braracknel Manor until I say otherwise. There was a murmur among the guests, a ripple of indignation and fear. Poirot watched them scatter, some hurriedly, some reluctantly. When the room had cleared, he turned to Hastings. Well, mon ami, he said, what do you think? Hastings frowned. They all have something to hide. Poirot smiled. Yes, and therein lies the challenge, to discern whose secrets are deadly, and whose are merely human. He moved toward the window, staring out into the misty afternoon. The mind is like the house, Hastings, full of locked doors, hidden passages and secrets buried under years of silence. We must tread carefully. Outside, the rain began again, pattering against the glass like fingers, tapping in warning. Inside, Hercule Poirot, greatest detective in the world, prepared to unlock every door. Chapter 4. Whispers from Below Stairs. The rain continued its soft, steady rhythm against the leaded windows of Braracknel Manor. As Poirot and I made our way to the servants' wing, the change in atmosphere was immediate. Gone were the high ceilings and gleaming marble floors, replaced by narrow corridors with scuffed wood and the faint lingering sense of furniture polish and cooking. Poirot moved with purpose, his sharp eyes missing nothing. He inspected the surroundings as if each chipped stair and frayed carpet held secrets. Mrs. Armitage had arranged for the household staff to gather in the old breakfast room, a modest chamber with plain oak chairs, and a battered fireplace that now sat cold and empty. As we entered, the servants rose awkwardly to their feet. They were 6 in number: Rogers the butler, Mrs. Sims the housekeeper, Elsie the young maid who had found Lady Bracknell's body, Cook, a heavy-set woman with sharp eyes, and the 2 kitchen maids, Lottie and May, who looked as though they would rather be anywhere else. Poirot offered a gentle nod. "Mes amis," he said, "this will not take long. I require only your memories of the evening in question, nothing more." He motioned for them to sit, and after a hesitant glance among themselves, they obeyed. First, Poirot turned to Rogers. The butler was the epitome of his profession: tall, spare, and impeccably discreet. Yet even his composed exterior showed cracks under Poirot's steady scrutiny. "You delivered the telegram to Lady Bracknell?" Poirot asked. "Yes, sir. It arrived at the front door around 11:05. I took it to her immediately as instructed." Poirot nodded, and after she read it, Rogers shifted. "She appeared shaken, sir, very pale." She rose quickly and left the drawing room. "Did you see what she did with the telegram?" "I did not, sir. She kept it clutched in her hand." "Did anyone follow her?" Rogers hesitated, the first true hesitation I had seen in him. "There was movement," he said carefully. "Guests leaving, conversations. It would not be proper for me to say what I did not observe fully." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Ah, but monsieur, you see more than you realize." He let Rogers stew in his discomfort for a moment, before turning his attention to the housekeeper. Mrs. Sims was stout and formidable, her expression one of guarded indignation. "Madame," Poirot said gently, "you were overseeing the clearing of the drawing-room after the guests departed." "Yes, sir, as is my duty." "And you entered Lady Bracknell's study that evening?" Her eyes flickered. "Not until the morning. I swear it, sir." Poirot's tone remained mild. "Yet you noticed something, n'est-ce pas? Some disturbance." Mrs. Sims pressed her lips together. "There was a faint smell of burning in the study," she admitted reluctantly, "but the fireplace was cold." "And you said nothing?" I thought perhaps her ladyship had destroyed a letter or two. She sometimes did." Poirot nodded slowly. "And you saw no trace of the telegram?" "No, sir." Another slight pause, just a fraction too long, before the words came. Poirot made a note. Next came Elsie, the maid. Poor Elsie trembled visibly, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron into tortured knots. "You discovered Lady Bracknell the next morning?" Poirot asked softly. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I knocked like always. When there was no answer, I opened the door. She was, her voice caught." Poirot's tone was soothing. "You did well, mademoiselle. You fetched help immediately." "I ran to Mrs. Sims, sir." "And you touched nothing in the room?" "No, sir. I swear it." Poirot nodded approvingly. And you saw no sign of the telegram? Elsie shook her head, wide-eyed. No, sir. Poirot patted her shoulder lightly, then turned to the remaining two, Lottie and May. The kitchen maids were barely out of childhood, their faces pale and solemn. You were in the kitchens all evening? Yes, sir, they chorused. Until when? Until past midnight, sir, said Lottie. We had clearing to do after the party. Did you see anyone, any of the guests or the household, moving about after Lady Bracknell retired? The girls exchanged a glance. It was late, May said uncertainly, but I thought I saw someone pass through the corridor by the side door. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Someone? Who? I couldn't see properly, May said miserably. Tall maybe, a man I think. And the side door? It's near the study, Lottie supplied. Sometimes used to take out letters to the early post. Poirot thanked them and dismissed the group, watching keenly as they left in a ragged procession. When the room was empty, he turned to me. You see, Hastings, he said, tapping his temple, already the picture forms. I looked at him blankly. Forming, is it? All I see are a dozen people who either saw nothing or are too frightened to say. Poirot smiled. But it is the very nature of what they say and what they omit. That tells me much. Take Grudges, for example. What about him? He saw Lady Bracknell disturbed, but he does not admit to noticing who approached her afterward. Yet he hesitated, which suggests he suspects someone, but is unwilling to name them. And Mrs. Sims? She smelled burning in the study. An anomaly, and said nothing. A loyal housekeeper, perhaps, or a cautious one. And Elsie? Poirot's expression softened. Elsie is truthful. She saw no telegram, because by morning, mon ami, the telegram was already gone. I exhaled. So, someone removed it during the night. Poirot wagged a finger. Very good, Hastings. And who had access? Who moved through the house freely? He turned back toward the window, watching as the rain drew misty veils across the manicured gardens. We have suspects with motive, means, and opportunity, he murmured. Now, we must test them. He straightened, a glint of steel in his eye. It is time to unsettle the guilty, Hastings. Time to set the little gray cells dancing. Chapter 5. A Second Voice. The breakfast room at Braracknel Manor the next morning was a scene of forced civility. The digital household had gathered out of a sense of duty rather than appetite. Silver dishes of eggs and kippers sat largely untouched beneath their gleaming covers. The clatter of cutlery and the occasional nervous cough punctuated an otherwise thick silence. Poirot, resplendent in a pale grey suit and a cravat of unusual intricacy, entered with Hastings at his side. Ah, he murmured softly, surveying the strained faces around the table. Already the battle lines are drawn, Hearn. Without waiting for an invitation, he seated himself at the foot of the table, precisely opposite Sir Julian Ransom. Mrs. Armitage, pale but determined, poured coffee into a delicate china cup and offered it to Poirot. You are most kind, madame, he said warmly, taking it with a small bow. He sipped once, then set the cup down. If you will indulge me, he said lightly, I have one or two little matters to clarify before we proceed further. There was a collective stiffening among the guests. Poirot's smile broadened slightly. Firstly, I must ask Mr. Standish. The final version of Lady Bracknell's will. It is in your possession? Standish inclined his head. It is, Monsieur Poirot. I carry it with me as she instructed before her death. Poirot steepled his fingers. And may I inquire, does it differ significantly from the previous drafts? A muscle ticked at the corner of Standish's jaw. There are adjustments, he said carefully. Some beneficiaries saw their inheritances reduced. Others, such as Miss Ivy Denholm, were favored more generously. A murmur rippled around the table. Ivy lowered her gaze to her plate. Merci, Poirot said, inclining his head. He turned his attention to Anthony Bracknell, who toyed idly with his knife. You, monsieur, stand to inherit less under this latest arrangement. Anthony grinned lazily. Enough to keep me in cigars and champagne, Poirot. I'm not shedding any tears. And yet, Poirot said softly, enough motive, if one was so inclined. Anthony's smile faded slightly. You're barking up the wrong tree, monsieur. Poirot merely raised one eyebrow in that infuriatingly mild way of his. After breakfast, Poirot requested that Mrs. Armitage join him privately in the study. She came readily enough, clutching her skirts nervously. Poirot waited until the door closed behind them before speaking. Madame, he said, his voice low and confidential, I believe you have not told me everything. She blanched. I have told you all I know, she protested. Poirot tapped one finger lightly against the polished desk. You know, perhaps, but you have not spoken. There is a difference. He leaned forward slightly. I ask you once more. Was there any matter, any dispute, any secret involving Lady Bracknell that might have led to her death? Mrs. Armitage wrung her hands. There was something, she whispered finally, but I dare not speak it openly. Then, tell it to me, Poirot urged, as you would to a priest in confession. It may save an innocent life. She hesitated, then drew a long breath. It concerns Anthony, she said in a shaking voice. He was desperate for money, deeply in debt. Lady Bracknell had threatened to cut him off entirely if he did not reform his ways. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly, and this was recent. Only weeks ago. Did others know? Mrs. Armitage nodded. Sir Julian did. They quarreled, Lady Bracknell and Sir Julian, over whether she was being too harsh. Poirot considered this for a moment. Merci, madame, he said finally. You have been most helpful. Later that afternoon, Poirot requested an interview with Elsie, the young maid who had discovered Lady Bracknell's body. She entered the study with wide, terrified eyes, twisting the edge of her apron. Poirot rose and greeted her with an exaggerated courtesy that seemed to put her at ease. You are Elsie, yes. A brave girl, to face such a terrible thing. She bobbed a curtsy. Thank you, sir. Poirot gestured to a chair. Now, child, think carefully. You entered the study that morning and found Lady Bracknell. You are sure she was alone? Yes, sir. She was cold. I screamed. Mr. Rogers came running. And before you entered, did you hear anything unusual? Elsie frowned. I thought I heard someone leaving the room. Soft footsteps. But when I looked, there was no one there. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Ah, very good. Soft footsteps, you say, not hurried. She shook her head. Quiet, like they were trying not to be heard. Poirot smiled warmly. You have the ears of a cat, mademoiselle. Elsie blushed. "And tell me," Poirot said gently, "in the days before Lady Bracknell's death, did you notice anything strange? Anything at all?" Elsie hesitated. "There was a man," she said finally. "I don't know his name. He came late one evening. Said he had a message for Lady Bracknell. I let him in, but when I told her, she said she would see no one." Poirot's expression sharpened. "Describe this man." Elsie wrinkled her brow. "Tall, dark hair, foreign maybe. He didn't give a name." Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "Very good, Elsie. You have done well." He dismissed her with a kind word, then turned to Hastings. "You see, mon ami, the shadow begins to take a shape." Hastings frowned. "You think this stranger has something to do with it?" Poirot smiled thinly. "I think, Hastings, that he has everything to do with it." That evening, Poirot convened a private meeting with Inspector Wellham, who had by now reluctantly ceded leadership of the case to the famous Belgian detective. "The situation," Poirot said briskly, "is no longer an accident, it is murder." Wellham shifted uneasily. "And you have proof, sir?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "I have the truth, monsieur. Soon I shall have the proof also." He folded his hands and stared into the flickering firelight. Lady Bracknell received a telegram, a warning. She was threatened by someone who feared what that telegram revealed, and when threats failed, they resorted to violence. "But who?" Wellham demanded. Poirot's moustache twitched. Inspector, if you are patient, I shall reveal all in good time." He rose, smoothing his jacket. "For now, we must prepare. Tomorrow evening, I shall gather all the suspects, and then," he smiled thinly, "then we shall have the truth." Outside, the wind howled against the stone walls of Braracknel Manor. Inside, Hercule Poirot prepared for his final, devastating move. Chapter 6. A hidden detail emerges. The next morning dawned grey and heavy, the mist lingering over the gardens of Braracknel Manor like an uneasy shroud. Poirot sat in the breakfast room, his cup of chocolate untouched, his gaze fixed thoughtfully on the patterned carpet beneath his feet. Hastings watched him in silence, having long ago learned not to interrupt Poirot's deep meditations. Instead, he busied himself with the newspaper and a piece of buttered toast. It was Mrs. Armitage who entered first, her face anxious. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, twisting her handkerchief again, "there is something you should know." Poirot looked up at once, his grey eyes sharp. "Please, madam, sit. Tell me all." Mrs. Armitage hesitated before taking the edge of the chair, perching like a bird about to flee. "Last night," she said in a hushed voice, "I thought I heard footsteps outside my room, late, well past midnight." "Footsteps," Poirot repeated. She nodded vigorously. "Yes. I went to the door and listened. I thought I heard the study door open, just for a moment. Then silence." Poirot's brows knitted together. "You are certain it was not the wind?" Mrs. Armitage looked indignant. "I know this house, Monsieur Poirot. The wind rattles the windows, but it does not walk." Poirot allowed a small smile to flicker across his lips. "Quite so, madame. Quite so." He tapped his fingers lightly against his cup. "This is interesting and troubling. You think someone's searching?" "I think," Poirot said slowly, "that the secret of Lady Bracknell's death are still very much alive." Armitage shivered visibly. though the room was warm. I thought you should know, she murmured. Poirot rose smoothly and bowed. You have rendered Hercule Poirot a service, madam. As she hurried from the room, Hastings leaned closer. You think it was Anthony? He asked in a low voice. Poirot shook his head slowly. Too obvious, mon ami. Too expected. No, it is someone more subtle. Someone who fears what Hercule Poirot might uncover. Later that morning, Poirot requested that all the principal household members be assembled once again. But this time, he added the butler Rogers and the maid Elsie to the group. The drawing room felt colder than before, the mist pressing against the windows, dulling the sunlight to a pale, anemic glow. Poirot paced slowly before them, his hands clasped behind his back. My friends, he began, there is among you someone who fears discovery. Anthony Bracknell snorted. You've said that before, Poirot. Where's your proof? Poirot turned on his heel, facing him directly. It is coming, monsieur. Patience is a virtue. Edade turned to Rogers. You, monsieur le butler. You delivered the telegram, did you not? Yes, sir. Rogers said, standing stiffly. And to whom did you give it? Directly into Lady Bracknell's own hand. And afterward? I withdrew at once, sir. I did not see her again that evening. Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. And you, Elsie? The young maid paled slightly under his gaze. I cleaned the drawing room after everyone left. Just picking up glasses and tidying, sir. And did you see the telegram? No, sir, I didn't. Poirot's sharp gaze did not waver. And you did not hear anything? A raised voice, the crumpling of paper, the striking of a match. Elsie shook her head vehemently. No, sir. Only, she faltered. Poirot leaned in slightly. Yes, mademoiselle. Speak without fear. Elsie twisted her apron between trembling fingers. There was a smell, sir, like burnt paper. There was a sudden stillness in the room. Poirot's face lit with satisfaction. Ah, at last we have something. He turned to Hastings with a triumphant little gesture. You see, mon ami, the ash in the fireplace, the absence of the telegram, it fits. Hastings nodded eagerly. And you think? Poirot silenced him with a slight motion of his hand. I think, he said carefully, that Lady Bracknell burned something after receiving the telegram. He turned to the others. And the question is, what was in that telegram that made her do so? There was a weighted silence. Poirot let it stretch uncomfortably before continuing. It is clear to Hercule Poirot that Lady Bracknell received disturbing news so troubling that she destroyed it, but not before others in the house became aware that something was amiss. He paced once more, every step measured. And what if someone else wanted that telegram destroyed? What if, fearing exposure, they ensured its disappearance? By force? The suggestion hung in the air, like the scent of scorched paper. Anthony shifted uneasily. Lady Frances stiffened, her lips a tight line. Sir Julian mopped his brow. Standish sat perfectly still, but his jaw worked slightly, as though grinding unseen frustrations. Avie Denholm stared at the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Poirot came to a halt before the fireplace. He turned suddenly. There is something else. He withdrew a small object from his pocket. A button, slightly scuffed with traces of black thread, still clinging to its eye. "I found this," Poirot said softly. Beneath the desk in Lady Bracknell's study, there was a collective intake of breath, and it does not match the buttons of Lady Bracknell's gown. His gaze swept the room, landing momentarily on each face. "It is a man's button." A sharp movement from Antony caught Poirot's eye, a twitch barely suppressed at the wrist of his jacket. Poirot filed the reaction away carefully. He turned to Rogers. "Kindly, Mr. Rogers, examine the guest's evening clothes." Rogers blinked. "Sir, you heard me," Poirot said firmly. "Jackets, waistcoats, trousers, discreetly of course. Report to me immediately if anything is missing, or mended." The butler bowed stiffly and withdrew. Poirot turned back to the assembled group, smiling serenely. "In the meantime," he said, "I advise you all to remain here. It is not long now before the truth reveals itself." When the guests had been released back to their rooms, Hastings turned to Poirot in excitement. "You have them on the run, Poirot." Poirot nodded absently, staring into the cold hearth. "Yes, Hastings, but the question remains. Which one is desperate enough to kill?" He paused. "And what secret was hidden in that cursed telegram?" Outside, the mist deepened, pressing against the windows, as if straining to listen. Poirot straightened his jacket and smoothed his mustache. "The mind games," he said softly, "are only beginning." Chapter 7. A Shadow in the Music Room. The morning following Poirot's interviews dawned with an eerie stillness. A fog had rolled in from the moors beyond Braracknel Manor, blanketing the estate in a pale shroud. The gravel paths glistened with dew. The hedgerows stood hushed, and even the birds seemed to have been silenced by some invisible command. Inside, breakfast was served without its usual pomp. The dining table, normally occupied with lively conversation or murmured critiques of society, had become a solemn place. The suspects kept their eyes fixed on their plates, their cutlery movements punctuated by silence. Poirot, ever immaculate in a light grey suit and deep blue cravat, sipped his coffee with measured elegance. Hastings sat beside him, nursing a slice of toast and observing the room with furrowed brow. Poirot's gaze flicked across the guests. Ivy Denholm barely touched her eggs. Lady Frances stared blankly at the tablecloth, her lips set in a thin, unimpressed line. Sir Julian wiped his brow repeatedly despite the cool air. Mr. Standish seemed preoccupied, tapping the edge of his teaspoon against his saucer. Anthony Bracknell alone appeared unaffected, slouched in his seat and buttering a croissant with exaggerated nonchalance. Mrs. Armitage was the only one not present. She had excused herself due to a headache. "Curious," murmured Poirot. "A household on edge, yet no one speaks." "Nothing like a death to spoil a breakfast," muttered Hastings. Poirot didn't respond. His eyes were on Ivy, who was now clutching her napkin so tightly it had begun to tear. After breakfast, Poirot requested access once more to the music room, ostensibly to inspect Lady Bracknell's harpsichord, an antique of some renown. The room was empty when he arrived save for Rogers, who stood polishing the brass handles of the cabinet with unnecessary diligence. "Ah, monsieur," said Poirot pleasantly. "A word, if I may." Rogers turned with a start and bowed stiffly. "Of course, sir." Poirot paced slowly to the piano and ran his fingers along the keys. A soft, melancholy chord lingered in the air. "You were in service with Lady Bracknell for 20 years, yes?" "21, sir." "Then you knew her habits well." "Indeed, sir. Very particular about her timing. Everything in its place. Breakfast at precisely 8. Letters dictated before noon." Poirot turned slightly, his voice light. "And her secrets, Rogers, were they also neatly kept?" Rogers stiffened, then resumed polishing. "She was a private woman, sir." "Yet you saw the telegram, did you not? The one she received the night she died." Rogers hesitated. "I delivered it, yes. From the boy on the bicycle." "You read it?" Rogers looked offended. "Certainly not, sir." Poirot walked to the fireplace, inspecting a faded oil painting of a weeping willow. "And what happened after you delivered it?" "She opened it, turned pale and left the room. I thought it best not to inquire." Poirot turned. "Did you dispose of it later?" Rogers flinched. "No, sir. I never saw it again, I swear." Poirot nodded. "Thank you, Rogers. You may go." Once alone, Poirot moved about the room with quiet deliberation. He examined the music sheets atop the harpsichord, noting their alignment. One was slightly askew. He lifted it. Beneath, folded crisply, was a single page torn from a notebook. The handwriting was light, delicate, hesitant. He studied it briefly before replacing it and retrieving Hastings from the hall. "A note?" Hastings asked when Poirot showed him. "A fragment of one. Not addressed, not signed. But it reads—" Poirot opened his notebook and read aloud. "I cannot keep the secret any longer. It will destroy me if I do." "Sounds like a confession," Hastings muttered. "Or a threat to confess," Poirot said. "Either way, it was never sent. Likely discarded in fear." "Who wrote it?" Poirot tapped the harpsichord gently. "Someone with access to the room. Someone young, sensitive, and afraid." "Ivy? Possibly. But why leave it here?" Poirot smiled faintly. "Perhaps it was once concealed, then forgotten in haste. The mind, mon ami. It plays curious tricks when under stress." That afternoon, Poirot requested a private conversation with Ivy Denholm. She arrived in the study looking paler than ever. Her hands clasped before her like a schoolgirl, awaiting scolding. "Ivy," Poirot said gently, gesturing for her to sit. "You love music, do you not?" "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. It's the only thing that truly clears my head." He nodded. "You played in the music room the night Lady Bracknell died?" "Yes." "Were you alone?" A pause. "No," she said. "Anthony came in for a time. We talked." "About what?" She hesitated, eyes shifting. "About leaving. About starting fresh. He said we could make a life in Paris." Poirot tilted his head. "Did you want that?" Her voice dropped. "Part of me did, but Lady Bracknell would never have allowed it. She said I was like a daughter, but she controlled everything." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Did you write a letter that night?" Ivy's breath caught. "No, I mean, yes, I started one. I tore it up and hid it beneath the music sheets." She blinked. I didn't mean to leave it. I thought I had burned it." Poirot gave a soft hum of understanding. "You were afraid." "Yes. I'd overheard something. Lady Bracknell speaking on the telephone, not long after the telegram. She said, 'He'll ruin us all if this gets out.'" Poirot's eyes narrowed. She was speaking of whom? I don't know, but I think it was Gregory Standish. He visited her more frequently lately, and I saw him in the hall afterward. He looked grey. Poirot rose slowly. Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. As Ivy turned to leave, Poirot added softly, You are not to blame for what happened. But others, perhaps they cannot say the same. Later that evening, Poirot summoned Hastings again to the study, laying out everything on the desk. The note, copies of the will drafts and a fresh sheet of deductions. The pieces begin to align, he said. Lady Bracknell received a telegram, disturbing, even damning. She burned it. Someone who had much to lose. And someone who may have. Hastings began, but Poirot raised a finger. Not yet, mon ami. The time for accusation is soon. But first, tomorrow, we gather everyone. He tapped the desk, and Poirot will lay the trap. Chapter 8. Poirot's Private Experiments. The morning dawned grey and sullen over Braracknel Manor, a heavy mist draping itself across the gardens like a funeral shroud. Within the house, the tension had grown nearly unbearable. Servants spoke in whispers. Guests glanced over their shoulders with nervous suspicion. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick more loudly, more accusingly than before. Poirot, immaculate as ever, sat at the breakfast table carefully buttering a roll with delicate precision. Across from him, Hastings frowned over his tea, still grappling with the revelations of the previous evening. So you believe, Hastings said at last, that the first version of everyone's story was riddled with half-truths. Poirot smiled faintly. Mon ami, you astonish me. It is not belief, it is certainty. He popped a small piece of the roll into his mouth, chewing thoughtfully. People lie, Hastings. They lie by omission, by misdirection, and by choice. But they also lie when they attempt to tell the truth, when their hearts are conflicted, when fear twists their recollections. He dabbed his lips with a linen napkin. Thus, it is not enough to listen to their words. One must listen also to what is not said. Hastings' brow furrowed, poured himself more tea. And what exactly are we missing? Poirot's eyes twinkled. A date, motive, mon ami. Or rather, a sufficient motive. He rose then, smoothing his jacket. Come, we must make an experiment. Poirot's first stop was the study, the heart of the mystery. Though the police had released the room, Poirot had insisted that it remain otherwise undisturbed. The heavy furniture still stood precisely as it had on the night of Lady Bracknell's death, and a faint lingering scent of lavender persisted in the air. He moved methodically, measuring steps from the chair to the desk, observing the line of sight from the door to the writing table, even testing the weight of the chair Lady Bracknell had presumably fallen from. You see, Hastings, he said, crouching by the fireplace. The narrative we are given is one of accident, a fall, a tragic misstep. He rose, brushing dust from his knees. But how likely is it, for a woman of Lady Bracknell's character, so poised, so controlled, to lose her balance so fatally? Hastings hesitated. Perhaps she was truly upset by the telegram. Poirot tilted his head. Ah, yes. But then why is the telegram gone? If it were innocent, a simple upsetting message from a relative or a financial concern, Why would it vanish without a trace? He smiled slightly. No, me. The removal of the telegram speaks not to accident, but to intent. Poirot crossed to the writing desk and opened the top drawer. Inside lay nothing but an inkstand, a blotter, and some scraps of notepaper. Yet Poirot's hand hovered over the drawer for a long moment, as if sensing something unseen. At last, he withdrew a magnifying glass from his pocket and bent low. There, he murmured. Hastings leaned in. At first, he saw nothing. Then, under Poirot's careful pointing, he discerned it. A faint smudge near the back of the drawer. Greasy, oval-shaped, just visible against the dark wood. A fingerprint, Hastings asked. Perhaps, Poirot said, but more importantly, evidence that the drawer was opened and something removed. He straightened. Someone rifled through this desk after Lady Bracknell's death. He tapped the edge thoughtfully. A knot, I think, to steal jewels or trinkets. No, they sought information. Leaving the study, Poirot turned his attention next to the servants. Elsie, the trembling maid who had found the body, was summoned first. She curtsied awkwardly before the great detective, twisting her apron between nervous fingers. Tell me, ma petite, Poirot said kindly. When you entered the study that morning, did anything strike you as unusual? Elsie swallowed hard. It were awful, sir. Her ladyship, lying there all crooked, and blood on the carpet. And the fireplace, sir. Poirot's eyes sharpened. The fireplace? Elsie nodded vigorously. There was ash scattered all about, sir, like someone had poked at it. Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. And did you touch anything? Oh, no, sir. I ran straight to fetch Rogers the butler. Poirot smiled reassuringly. Très bien, ma petite. You have been most helpful. As Elsie left, Poirot turned to Hastings. You see, even a frightened child notices what the great Inspector Wellham did not. The ashes, Hastings said slowly. The telegram? Poirot tapped his nose. Possibly. Or something more. Next came Rogers, the butler. He was a tall, spare man with a dignified air, though Poirot noted the tremor in his hands as he folded them neatly before him. Rogers, Poirot began, you delivered the telegram to Lady Bracknell? Yes, sir. At approximately 5 minutes past 11. And you saw her read it? Indeed, sir. She seemed discomposed. Poirot nodded. And after you left her? I returned to my duties, sir, preparing the house for the night. No one else, to your knowledge, entered the study. Rogers hesitated. I cannot say for certain, sir. Guests were moving about. I remained in the servants' wing after that. Poirot made a small note on his pad. You noticed nothing, no sounds, no disturbances. Only a door closing, sir, about 11:30. But whether it was the study or another room, I cannot say. Poirot gave a gracious little bow. You have been most obliging, monsieur. Rogers departed, his shoulders stiff. Poirot turned to Hastings. A door closing, he mused, and who, mon ami, would be moving about the house at that hour? Hastings frowned. One of the guests, surely. Poirot nodded. Yes. But which one? And why? As they returned to the drawing-room, Poirot paused. Mon ami, he said, we must arrange for another little experiment. Another? Hastings said, groaning slightly. Tonight we shall recreate the night of the crime. Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. We shall dine at precisely 8. The guests shall gather here, and each shall be asked casually, of course, to recount where they were and when. And then, Poirot's eyes gleamed. And then, my dear Hastings, we shall observe. He tapped his temple. The psychology, Hastings. It is always the psychology that reveals the truth. As they spoke, beyond the windows, the mist thickened, rolling across the gardens like a living thing. The house, ancient and brooding, seemed to settle deeper into its secrets. And Poirot, with the patience of a master chess player, prepared to make his first move. Chapter 9. Poirot plays his hand. The guests at Braracknel Manor had grown restless. Over the past days, Poirot's calm presence had turned from a source of polite reassurance to one of thinly veiled dread. Everyone was aware that the famed detective was circling closer to something, but no one knew where or when he would strike. In the great drawing room, as evening fell and lamps were lit against the darkening sky, Poirot stood alone by the fire. His silhouette, sharp and precise, cut a curious figure against the backdrop of ancestral portraits. Hastings joined him, a cup of tea in hand. "You've rattled them, Poirot," he observed. "I dare say any one of them might bolt if you pushed hard enough." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Ah, but that is the trick, mon ami. One must not push. Not yet. One must invite the confession. It must come like a bubble rising naturally to the surface." He turned, eyes glittering. "And tonight, I propose we create the conditions most favorable for such bubbles." Hastings frowned. "Conditions?" "An atmosphere, Hastings. Tension, uncertainty, suspicion. It is all psychology, you understand. When the guilty believe their secret is moments from discovery, they will reveal themselves without realizing." He clapped his hands once, sharply. "Come, it is time." Within the hour, Poirot had summoned the household once again to the drawing room. The summons had been polite but firm, and when Poirot requested one's presence, refusal was not an option. The suspects filed in, each bearing the weight of the unspoken. Sir Julian Ransom, his florid face drawn taut, lingered near the drinks cabinet. Gregory Standish, immaculate as ever, took a chair by the window, but kept glancing toward the door, as if contemplating escape. Lady Frances Mortimer, pinched and suspicious, sat stiffly with gloved hands clasped in her lap. Young Ivy Denholm entered almost last, her steps hesitant, her eyes darting nervously from face to face. And Anthony Bracknell, arrogant, smirking, sauntered in with all the bravado of a man who believed he could outwit the world. Poirot addressed them collectively. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said warmly, "you must forgive me for disturbing your evening. But I know, that the moment of truth is close." There was a stir among the group, a rustling of dresses, a tightening of fists. Poirot's gaze swept the room. "You see," he continued, "the mystery of the missing telegram is no mystery at all. It was destroyed." He let that settle before adding softly, "And not by Lady Bracknell." Lady Frances gasped audibly. Standish set down his drink with a sharp clink. Poirot smiled faintly. "Yes, someone removed it to protect themselves. Because that telegram contained information that would have upended fortunes, revealed secrets, destroyed ambitions. He began to pace slowly. But you see, in the haste, they made mistakes. He turned abruptly to Sir Julian. You, Sir Julian, claimed to be outside with Mr. Standish at the time the telegram was delivered. Yet the gardener saw you smoking alone near the east wing at precisely the moment the butler entered with the message. Sir Julian blustered, reddening. Well, I may have. Poirot raised a hand. It is of no consequence. Your lie suggests fear, not guilt. Sir Julian sagged visibly with relief. Poirot's attention shifted to Standish. And you, monsieur, you who pride yourself on precision, you failed to mention a most curious fact. Lady Bracknell had summoned you for a private meeting the morning after the soirée. A meeting you did not live to attend. Standish's composure cracked for a heartbeat. A flash of something primal in his eyes. That is absurd, he said tightly. There was no meeting. Poirot lifted a small folded note from his pocket. Found tucked into her appointment book, monsieur, in Lady Bracknell's own hand. He let the damning evidence hang in the air. But again, Poirot continued gently, it is not you who interests me most. A ripple of tension moved through the room. Poirot's eyes locked onto Ivy Denholm. Miss Denholm, he said with unexpected kindness, I believe you hold the key. Ivy shrank back, visibly trembling. I don't know anything. But you saw something, Poirot pressed softly. That night, after the telegram. Tears welled in Ivy's wide eyes. She shook her head violently. No, I didn't mean to. Anthony Bracknell took a menacing step forward. Leave the girl alone, Poirot. She's frightened out of her mind. Poirot turned to him, the force of his gaze pinning Anthony like a specimen under glass. And why should she be, monsieur? Unless someone has given her calls. Anthony sneered but said nothing. Hastings, watching closely, saw a thin film of sweat break out across Anthony's brow. Poirot pressed the advantage. You see, Miss Denholm saw who entered Lady Bracknell's study that night. After the telegram was delivered, Ivy let out a strangled sob. I didn't know what to do. I saw Anthony, Mr. Bracknell, going in. I thought maybe he was checking on her, but she broke off, burying her face in her hands. Anthony laughed harshly. So what? I went in, yes. She asked for me. She was upset. I tried to calm her. And then? Poirot asked softly. And then, Anthony said, straightening, I left. That's all. Poirot's expression did not change. Except for one thing, he said. Lady Bracknell had changed her will. You discovered it that night. And you realized what the telegram confirmed, that your inheritance was gone. A beat of stunned silence. Anthony's face twisted into something feral. You can't prove anything, he snarled. Poirot tilted his head. No. Perhaps not with physical evidence, but with logic, He held up a finger. First, you had motive, the loss of fortune. Second, you had opportunity. You alone were seen entering the study at a critical moment. Third, you had knowledge. The drafts of the new will, the arrival of the telegram warning Lady Bracknell that the amendments were being contested by a secret challenger. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. And fourth, you had fear. Fear enough to destroy the telegram, to arrange her death as an accident. Anthony lunged forward suddenly, but Hastings and 2 footmen moved faster, restraining him before he could do more than overturn a small table. Poirot watched calmly as Antony was hauled away, snarling threats. When the door closed behind him, Poirot turned back to the others. "The affair, mes amis," he said with a small bow, "is nearly concluded. But tomorrow morning we shall gather once more, and chain in shoe. And Hercule Poirot will lay out every detail." He smiled thin and cat-like. "And you shall see how the smallest lies grow into the most fatal truths." Outside, the storm finally broke in earnest, rain hammering the manor walls, as though the very heavens themselves wished to wash the house clean. And that concludes today's journey into the shadows of mystery and deduction. What did you think of this case? Did you see the twist coming, or did it catch you by surprise? Share your theories and favorite moments in the comments below. Love to hear your take. And if you're craving more thrilling detective tales, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next mystery. Until then, stay curious. The next clue might be closer than you think.